This One Piece theory is crazy. Today I'm bringing you a theory that is completely outrageous. A One Piece theory that could completely change everything we think about the work, the vast majority of the most important mysteries of the series, and especially the ending of One Piece. I don't want to give you too many spoilers because I'm convinced that the theory is going to blow your mind completely. Just to tell you that this kind of video takes a lot of work, so I would really appreciate a big like and for you to subscribe to the channel to see more videos and let me know in the comments what you're doing. If you've put it on in the background while going for a walk, if you're working, if you're eating, enjoy your meal. If you put it on before going to sleep, a good night kiss. And you know I love reading your comments, but I'll stop talking now and leave you directly with the theory. Let's go! And it's quite clear that the canonical information we have about Davy Jones in One Piece is very little. That's why I'm going to do my best to build mountains with the little pieces of data we have. But as of today, with what we have, it's impossible to put together a complete story. So actually, the only reason it's even possible to discuss Davy Jones is because Davy Jones is a real-life pirate legend. That is, we can draw information from real life, since from the series, well, for now, we don't have much, and I'm sure that most people who have watched One Piece have also seen Pirates of the Caribbean, and vice versa. I, for example, have not seen Pirates of the Caribbean, but I had to research to make this video. I should watch them, let me know in the comments. As I was saying, Davy Jones is a very well-known name in popular culture, and it is logical to assume that although there will obviously be some differences, much of Davy Jones's story in One Piece will be based on existing mythology, just as Oda has done with other legendary characters. Exactly like the character of Loki, the giant prince, because if we look at him and compare him with the Loki from Norse mythology, at first glance, they are very different. But in the fundamental and most important aspects, they are essentially the same, while being, as I said, quite different at the same time. Anyway, I might be going on a bit, but I want us to think of Davy Jones with that mindset. That's how Oda usually works. When you better understand the legend that inspires a character, you will better understand the character itself. So let's start directly with the story of Davy Jones in mythology. And it is much simpler than one might think, because unlike many characters from various mythologies that Oda has adapted in One Piece, Davy Jones himself does not have a very concrete story. Historically, Davy Jones is basically just a name associated with pirate life. In fact, when talking about Davy Jones, it almost always refers to Davy Jones's locker, which is a nautical euphemism for death at sea. In pirate tradition, Davy Jones is often presented as a sort of ruler of the pirate underworld. In many representations, he is literally depicted as the demon of the sea, so if we base it only on that, it seems we don't know much about Davy Jones, and the theory would have to end here. But actually no, because there are two additional resources we can use to reconstruct the story of this character. The first would be the legend and mythology of Davy Jones, which has always intrigued people for a long time. It is natural that there are academic theories about what his real origin might be. Even if we don't know the exact truth, these theories are relevant to our discussion. And the second thing is that sometimes the historical truth behind an inspiration for One Piece is not the most important. That's how myths and legends are. Perhaps there was some real event that originated them, but over time they become stories told in different ways, with many creative liberties. That's why the character of Davy Jones in One Piece could very well end up having much in common with the popular fictional version of Davy Jones. For example, as I say, the one from Pirates of the Caribbean. In addition to the little we know in the manga, Oda is not exactly a purist of mythology, and I hate to break illusions, but in the original legends, Davy Jones was not a giant squid, nor did he sail on the Flying Dutchman. In fact, the Flying Dutchman was another separate pirate legend that Disney decided to mix with Davy Jones, and it really worked for them. Legends and myths tend to be that malleable. Alright, here goes a brief summary of the story of Davy Jones according to Disney and Pirates of the Caribbean. Originally, Davy Jones was simply a man, a pirate, and sailor. The exact circumstances vary in the stories, but essentially Davy Jones fell in love with a sea goddess, beautiful and fickle, named Calypso. As proof of his love, he agreed to fulfill a task that the goddess assigned him, to guide the souls of those who perished at sea to their eternal rest. The idea is that Davy Jones could only return to reunite with Calypso on her island once every 10 years. He accepted that deal out of love, but he was deceived and betrayed. When he returned to the island after 10 years hoping to find her, Calypso was not there. It's curious because many think of Davy Jones as the devil of the sea, but in Pirates of the Caribbean, the real devil is Calypso. Davy made a deal with Calypso, who would be the equivalent of the devil in that story, and he didn't get what he wanted. On the contrary, he was condemned to a rather horrible fate, doing something for all eternity that he really didn't want to do. Due to this betrayal, Davy Jones convened the First Pirate Brotherhood Council, a great alliance of pirates, and conspired with them to seize control of the seas from the goddess Calypso. Ultimately, the Brotherhood managed to imprison Calypso by trapping her essence within the body of a mortal woman. Despite achieving revenge in this way, Davy remained heartbroken by the love he had for her, so much so that due to the pain he felt, he tore out his heart with his own hands and locked it away in the famous dead man's chest. In practice, you can see it as Davy Jones removing his own soul. After that, he became an evil being. He renounced his sacred duty to guide souls in the afterlife and instead began recruiting those who did not want to die into his crew, basically enslaving fearful sailors. Davy Jones took advantage of people's fear of dying without fulfilling their goals, becoming something like a literal demon of the sea. Over time, the entire conflict of Pirates of the Caribbean revolves around the heart of Davy Jones. Whoever controls his heart controls the man, and this is where the story gains interesting depth. You see, Davy Jones was part of the pirate council that initially united to defeat the sea goddess because they saw her as the devil to conquer, but then Davy Jones became the devil. So, the Pirate Brotherhood had to gather again and decided to release Calypso to help them fight against Davy Jones, now turned into a monster and also against the Navy. There is something cyclical in all this that fits well with the world of One Piece. Essentially, whoever holds the power ends up becoming the devil of the story. First, the sea goddess Calypso was the villain, then it was Davy Jones, then it was the trading company, which was the Navy when it gained Davy Jones's power, and then the pirates again when they released Calypso, making deals with the devil and ending up becoming the devil themselves in each cycle. In other words, the devil keeps changing faces, but at each stage of the adventure, the Sea Warriors are fighting against some incarnation of evil. In the end, while everyone was fighting each other, pirates against pirates, pirates against the Navy, deep down, they were all fighting for the same thing, only each side had its own vision of what the true evil to defeat was. Summarizing the story of Davy Jones in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones had a love story. Davy Jones was betrayed. Davy Jones lost his soul by removing his heart. Davy Jones became a demon, and the way to free him from his curse in the end was to kill him. Davy Jones had to die to be free. Now then, we will later revisit some details of Pirates of the Caribbean that I haven't mentioned yet, because I believe the story of Davy Jones in One Piece will share many of these key elements. But let's move on to what we know within the world of One Piece itself. The only real information we have been given about Davy Jones in the manga is told to us by Nico Robin during the Foxy Saga. Robin mentions that Davy Jones was a pirate from a very, very long time ago, and that he was cursed by a demon. And honestly, just with that, it already sounds quite close to everything we just reviewed. But as I mentioned before, even though there isn't a real historical tale of Davy Jones in our world, there are indeed investigations and theories about the origin of the name Davy Jones. It may not be the definitive truth, but it's as close as we can get to a historical basis for this legend, and it's worth discussing. Specifically, I want to talk to you about the theory that the name Davy Jones actually comes from the biblical story of the prophet Jonah. And I'll say it right away, those who are into theories know that Oda has been heavily inspired by the Bible, so this already makes some sense, right? I won't go into all the details of Jonah's story, because not all are relevant. I prefer to give a summary of who Jonah was and why he is related to Davy Jones. The most characteristic thing about Jonah is that at first he refused to obey a direct order from God. Essentially, Jonah fled from what God had commanded him to do. There are different interpretations of why he did it, but we can assume that Jonah was afraid to fulfill that divine mandate. The fact is that God had ordered Jonah something very specific, to go preach to a city full of wickedness to offer them salvation. And Jonah didn't like that idea one bit. He thought those wicked people didn't deserve to be saved. In fact, later in the story, when God actually forgives that city, Jonah gets very angry. Jonah didn't want to save the wicked. Returning to the part where Jonah flees, Jonah boarded a ship to escape the assigned mission, and then God unleashed a great storm at sea to prevent him from fleeing. The sailors on the ship panicked, and Jonah, knowing he was the cause of the disaster, confessed to them that the storm was his fault for disobeying God. He even told them to throw him into the sea to calm the storm and save their lives. This shows that Jonah was willing to face the consequences of his actions. He offered himself as a sacrifice to appease divine wrath. Although more than genuine repentance, it seemed basically a kind of resignation. Basically, Jonah preferred to die rather than fulfill the order of God that he so detested. Then, in the midst of this furious storm, the sailors finally threw Jonah into the sea. But God did not intend for Jonah to die there. Instead, he sent a great fish, traditionally interpreted as a whale, which swallowed Jonah whole. Jonah remained alive inside the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. That time, inside the belly of the cetacean, was a kind of personal purgatory for Jonah. It served for him to reflect and pray, to think about what had happened and why he was wrong to disobey. A bit of sailor context. In the nautical culture of the past, it was considered that having a Jonah on board brought bad luck. Imagine the sailors are at sea and suddenly a terrible storm breaks out. They would look at each other searching for the jinx. Who is the Jonah on this ship? Who do we have to throw overboard? That is to say, Jonah became synonymous with a person who brings bad luck at sea, and all this fits quite well with the similarity between the name Jonah and Jones. It is believed that the term Davy Jones might have originated as a deformation or evolution of Jonah. On the other hand, Davy sounds similar to devil in some old maritime languages, so some think that Davy was a nickname given to certain spirits or entities, like saying the devil Jones, which is where Davy John would come from. In short, that's how language evolves. One day, someone says something to another, others like how it sounds. Everyone starts repeating it, and in the end, no one remembers where it exactly came from. The other specific part of the legend of Davy Jones is his famous locker, Davy Jones's locker. In sailor jargon, as we said, it's a euphemism for death at sea, but it doesn't refer to death itself, rather a kind of final resting place beneath the waves. Notice that Davy Jones's locker is never exactly described as hell or the afterlife. It is more like a kind of purgatory, an intermediate place between life and death for those who die at sea. In Pirates of the Caribbean, in fact, Davy Jones's job was to guide souls to the afterlife. But first, those souls passed through Davy Jones's locker, a marine limbo before their final destination. This makes a perfect parallel with Jonah inside the whale. Jonah was in a state where he was neither dead nor alive, suspended in the darkness of the fish's belly. But why am I telling you all this? Well, because I believe that the story of Jonah could be exactly the inspiration for Oda for the character of Davy Jones in One Piece, both his personality and certain key events in his life. In general terms, Jonah was someone with a strong sense of morality, who nevertheless was filled with hatred towards the wicked. He wanted the wicked to suffer and be condemned, and it was very difficult for him to learn compassion. Jonah saw himself as a righteous man who wanted to save the innocent, but at the same time, he wished to punish the wicked mercilessly. Now, why am I so sure that Davy Jones in One Piece will be based on Jonah? Well, because knowing Jonah's story, we already have a character in One Piece whose story fits that mold too well. That character is Rox D. Zebek. For now, the information we have portrays Rox D. Zebek is surprisingly a guy with good intentions at heart. We know that Rox wanted to dethrone the celestial dragons and become the king of the world, but we still don't have the full story of his motives. Even so, with what we already saw in the God Valley flashback, it's very clear that his crusade implied that the world government was evil, practically the enemy of humanity in his view. Just like Jonah, who saw the sinful city as something that had to be destroyed. There is a very revealing detail in God Valley, and it is that when Rox meets the king of Elbaf, who is in the holy land of Mary Joaz, Rox's face shows surprise and annoyance, and he says something like, "A giant in the holy land? Is this guy lost or what?" Rox knows that the celestial dragons enslaved giants, and seeing that giant there clearly strikes him as curious. This suggests that Rox had a sense of justice or compassion towards those who suffered under the celestial dragons. I might be reading too much into it, but take a look. Prince Loki of Elbaf idolizes Rox D. Zebek, and during the attack on Elbaf, when Loki faces the Holy Knights, he says, "I would never join scum like you." Considering that Loki himself has said his goal is to destroy the world, and still thinks the celestial dragons are much worse than him, I imagine that Loki, as a fanatic disciple of Rox, is repeating something Rox used to say. Loki hates the celestial dragons because Rox instilled that in him indirectly, and I think it's very significant that Loki worshipped Rox, because the narrator in the manga reveals to us that Rox D. Zebek worshipped Davy Jones. Do you see? Loki idolizes Rox. Rox idolized Davy Jones. Davy Jones, according to real-world historians, is based on Jonah. Everything is fitting into layers. Rox wants to save the world by overthrowing the evil gods, the Tenryubito, but he also wants those evildoers to get what they deserve, just like Jonah, who wanted to save the innocent, but for the wicked to burn in hell. Rox, like Jonah, rebelled against the god of his time. In this case, he rebelled against Imu, the divine figure of the world government. Jonah fled from God and embarked with some unknown sailors. Rox fled to the seas and formed a crew full of powerful pirates who were not really very loyal to him. When Jonah unleashed divine wrath, his sailors threw him overboard. When Rox caused the God Valley incident, his crew probably betrayed him, which is implied that in God Valley there were internal betrayals in the crew of, in summary, Rox D. Zebek is practically the Jonah of One Piece. And this would imply that Davy Jones, whom Rox revered, is also essentially a Jonah within the story of One Piece. So far we have associated Davy Jones with Jonah on the side of the legend, and with Rox D. Xebec due to Rox's idolatry towards him. So I think we already have a solid basis for speculation. I find it very likely that the character of Davy Jones in One Piece has a personality and background inspired by Jonah, and that his story follows some of the patterns of Jonah's story mixed with those of Davy Jones's story from Pirates of the Caribbean that we summarized earlier. But before going completely crazy, there is one last piece of the puzzle we need to mention: the Davy back fights. We already know that Davy Jones is somehow related to that strange pirate game introduced in the Foxy Saga, because it cannot be a coincidence that Rox D. Xebec, a worshipper of Davy Jones, formed his crew through Davy backfights. And the narrator told us that Rox recruited members from other crews using that game. And what is the premise of a Davy backfight? Steal members from the rival crew and force them to join yours. It is a game of submission, basically. The winning captain takes the nakama from the loser. That sounds very similar to something we have already seen Emu can do, doesn't it? Think about how Emu can literally erase entire islands from the map or subjugate people at will as if they were pieces in a game. This theme of subjugating and taking what you want is present both in Emu's powers and in the Davy backfights. It can't be a coincidence. Now let's connect the dots. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones didn't start as the devil. Jonah wasn't the devil either. Of course not, they were ordinary people or pirates who ended up in situations where the devil turned them to his cause. In One Piece, in the Foxy Saga, Sanji explains to us that pirates call Davy back the act of taking what you want from your enemies and, for example, snatching their companions. This game is named Davy, probably after Davy Jones. So what is the original background of a Davy backfight? Well, I'm going to tell you what I suspect. I believe that the Davy backfights were originally created to recover Davy. In other words, I sense that in ancient times, someone lost Davy Jones, lost his soul to a devil, and created this game to try to recover it. I have a very strong hunch here. I suspect that someone, perhaps Emu, or someone with Emu's power in the past, took Davy Jones's soul in a game or a bet. It could have literally been a gambling duel against the devil. That's why the Davy backfights exist, to keep alive the possibility of reversing that outcome, to train and one day recover what was lost. As an interesting note, there is an American song called The Devil Went Down to Georgia, which is about a musician challenging the devil to a fiddle duel. If you have never heard it, I recommend it because it quite well describes the idea of beating the devil at his own game, very much in line with what I think Oda might be doing with this legend. The image I have is the following: Davy Jones challenged the devil of the sea to a game, a competition, a bet, and lost something more valuable than life. He lost his soul and, as a consequence, was forced to join the devil's crew. Imagine it, Davy Jones and his band facing a demonic being in a sort of legendary Davy backfight, and Davy loses, and as punishment, he and perhaps part of his crew become enslaved by the devil. In the Legend of Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones tore out his heart and kept it in a chest, thus distancing his soul from himself. In One Piece, it could be similar, but with a twist. Perhaps it was the devil who tore out Davy Jones's soul and kept it somewhere, in Davy Jones's locker. In any case, the result is the same. The pirate Davy Jones ended up becoming the demon himself. Let's remember what Robin said, a pirate from a long time ago who was cursed by a demon, and what better curse than to become what you hated the most? It could be that Davy Jones was cursed, turning him into a demon under the control of the original devil. Even the small reference by Sanji in the Foxy Saga makes me think. Sanji says that taking what you want from your enemies, pirates call it Davy backfight. And at the end of the Foxy Saga, they say that whoever breaks the rules of that game goes to Davy Jones's locker, meaning they lose their pirate soul. It all sounds like the game is very, very tied to Davy's story. And what would happen after Davy lost his soul? Well, I imagine that his nakamas, or the people who loved him, wanted to get him back. The only way to recover your lost comrade was to play against the devil again and win. That's where the tradition of the Davy backfights would have originated. Pirates training and competing among themselves to one day be ready to challenge the devil again and recover Davy. Does it sound crazy to you? Well, think about how it fits in Pirates of the Caribbean. Davy Jones removes his heart, which is equivalent to losing his soul. He keeps it in the chest, his locker, and he himself becomes the devil of the sea. Well, in One Piece, the version would be that Davy Jones lost his soul in a game against the sea demon and ended up cursed as a demon. Davy Jones in One Piece probably challenged the Sea Devil to a game and lost, and as a consequence, he transformed into a demon, becoming just another pawn of the devil himself. Obviously, it's still an incomplete story because we're extrapolating a lot, but what a story. I hope this theory is entertaining for now and seems quite solid to you, at least as much as it does to me. At first, I asked myself the question, could Davy Jones actually have been Joy Boy? We know of two great legendary figures from the past, Joy Boy, the hero of the Void Century, and Davy Jones, this cursed pirate about whom we have some mentions, and it is logical to wonder if they could be the same. And so far, nothing I've said contradicts that possibility. It could be that Joy Boy and Davy Jones were the same person, but interpreted in different ways by history, but I'll be honest, it would seem a bit dull to leave it at that. I prefer to raise the stakes and offer you something you've never heard before. I want you to say, what the heck did I just hear? When you finish listening to this theory. So even though Davy Jones could simply be Joy Boy, I'm going to propose something even crazier for you to really have something to think about. Until now, my hypotheses have been relatively logical as far as it goes, but hold on, because now comes the truly outrageous part of the theory. Let's remember, in Pirates of the Caribbean, the story of Davy Jones is a tragic love story. Davy Jones made a pact with the woman he loved, Calypso, and ended up feeling betrayed by her. But beware, in the movies, Calypso didn't actually betray him with bad intentions. She confesses to Davy that she still loved him, but her wild and untamed nature forced her to be free, not to be tied down waiting 10 years for him. Basically, Calypso could not stop being free because freedom was her essence. Davy Jones, blinded by pain, interpreted it as an unforgivable betrayal and demonized her in his mind. But in reality, it wasn't exactly like that. There are interesting parallels here with One Piece. We could compare Calypso, that goddess of untamable freedom, with the idea of the sun god Nika, the embodiment of freedom itself. Even with Luffy himself, Calypso had a nature that could not be chained. Something like absolute freedom governed her life. And what does Luffy represent if not freedom? Calypso did not wait for Davy Jones because she could not betray herself. She could not stop being free. Davy Jones, in his pain, perceived her as an evil traitor, like the devil of the sea, Sun, but in reality, he simply did not understand her nature. In One Piece, I think we will see something similar. Davy Jones probably became enemies with someone he cared about a lot, a friend, a loved one, maybe even his own captain, because he felt that person failed him or betrayed him. But it may be that Davy was wrong, that he didn't understand the higher reason behind his friend's action. Let's go back to Jonah. It's easy to imagine that Jonah felt betrayed by God. God wanted to save the wicked people that Jonah believed unworthy of salvation. Perhaps Jonah even thought, why is God asking me for something so absurd? Is he playing with the devil by putting me in the middle of his game? Jonah might have come to believe that God himself was deceiving him or putting him on the devil's side for no apparent reason. And then Jonah, confused and angry, betrayed God by disobeying him and fleeing. I would like to think that something like that happened in the story of Davy Jones in One Piece, that Davy Jones ended up confronting someone he deeply cared for or respected because he felt that person betrayed him first. Davy Jones made an enemy of someone very important to him, someone almost divine in his life. It could be his captain, his best friend, or even his beloved because he felt that person had betrayed him. Although in reality, he was wrong and did not understand the full picture. So I propose this. Was Davy Jones actually Joy Boy? Or perhaps was he someone from the era of Joy Boy who ate the Hito Hito no Mi, model Nika, the sun god, and was basically a parallel to Luffy? Personally, I don't think so. My theory leads me to believe he was a friend or close nakama of someone like Luffy, possibly Joy Boy himself, rather than being Joy Boy. We have to be careful with our assumptions. We've always thought, oh yes, he was a great pirate from the past. Surely he was a great captain. But what if not? Davy Jones could well have been the first mate of a crew, a member, not the leader. Maybe Davy Jones was part of Joy Boy's crew, even his right-hand man, and not the captain himself. Imagine that Davy Jones received a divine order in a way, an order from his captain, who for him was like a godly figure, especially if that captain had the fruit of the sun god Nika, who was practically a divine envoy, and Davy Jones refused to carry out that order. He fled feeling betrayed or outraged by what he had been asked. In terms of analogy, Davy Jones would be Jonah, his captain. Joy Boy would be the god or the son of God, the champion of the divine will at that time. Joy Boy with the Nika fruit and his mission to free the world would be that sun god giving orders, sometimes, that no one understands. If everything I am saying were true, that pirate in that context is literally participating in a game, a cosmic game of betting against the devil. You are fighting against the devil, and what you risk is your freedom or your soul, your dreams. Once you enter the game, you cannot back out without consequences, because even if you manage to escape with your life, if you abandon, you would have lost the most important thing in your life, your dream, your goal, which in this world is equivalent to losing your soul. The character Zoro himself makes his point of view clear. He would rather die than give up on his dreams. In fact, Eiichiro Oda himself said that Luffy does not kill his enemies because in the world of One Piece and for Luffy himself, it is considered worse to destroy a person's dreams than to end their life. And that is what Luffy does with his enemies. And I am not just saying this metaphorically, it is explicitly in the rules of the Davy back fights in One Piece. There are 3 articles that define the defeat in that game. Number 1, any crew member captured during the game can only be recovered by playing again. There is no rescue by brute force. It has to be within the game itself. Number 2, the captured must swear immediate loyalty to the winning captain. That is to say, your will comes to belong to the enemy. And number 3, a stolen flag can never be raised again. Losing your flag is losing your identity as a crew, and they warn that those who do not obey these rules will end up in Davy Jones's locker as a wretch. Translated, the one who breaks the rules loses their pirate soul and becomes cursed. It's not that they die instantly or anything, but it's worse. They are an outcast whose existence no longer has honor or purpose. A lost soul, metaphorically dead in life. It sounds like going to Davy Jones's locker is like condemning yourself to that purgatory we talked about. So what do I think happened to Davy Jones? That he didn't play by the rules. I believe that Davy Jones, after arguing with his captain Joy Boy, or whoever his divine friend was, abandoned the crew in the middle of that game against the devil they had going on. He broke the most sacred rules of pirate camaraderie, and that's why he suffered a fate worse than death. And here comes the craziest part of this theory, so get ready. I have a crazy idea about the identity of Davy Jones that surprisingly fits. What if Davy Jones actually parallels Usopp? Yes, you heard right. Our Usopp, the sniper of the Straw Hats. Before you say, what? Let me explain the parallel calmly, because I know at first it may sound absurd, but it fits incredibly well. Let's go back for a moment to the Water 7 saga. Think about Usopp's story during Water 7 and Eni's lobby, and compare it with Jonah's. Usopp received an order from his captain, Luffy, who happens to be the bearer of the power of the sun god Nika, future king of the pirates. And basically, Luffy is the divine figure at sea in the current era. That order was to abandon his dear friend, the ship going Mary, which was unfortunately destined to die, to stop functioning. After all it had endured, and he decided they should let the Mary go, give it a proper funeral, and get a new ship. Usopp did not understand or accept that order. It hurt him deeply. He was furious, afraid to let go of the ship that represented the crew's friendship. He thought Luffy was wrong, that he was betraying the Mary. What did Usopp do? He challenged his captain. He had a serious fight with Luffy, even left the crew and ran away, separated from them. This is the equivalent of Jonah saying no to God and escaping on a ship. Usopp, angry and hurt, went off on his own. In that fight in Water 7, Usopp ended up saying very harsh things to Luffy, implying that Luffy was irresponsible, a fool for discarding the Mary, almost calling him a coward or heartless, similar to how the people of Wano called Odin a fool for not fighting. Usopp was so blinded by anger and fear that he practically treated Luffy as if he were the villain, the devil in that situation. Remember a brutal phrase from Usopp during his duel with Luffy? Go ahead, try to kill me. I will beat you at your own game. I have already figured out how to take you down. At that moment, Usopp, our favorite liar, was taking on the role of challenger, as if Luffy were the enemy to defeat, all because he couldn't stand the decision his captain had made. And what happened? Usopp lost that fight because no matter how brave he was standing up to Luffy, we all knew deep down that he couldn't win, especially not against his captain. Luffy defeated him, and notice, Luffy didn't finish him off or anything, he just let him go. After the fight, Usopp was completely alone. He decided not to return to the crew out of wounded pride. That Usopp we knew metaphorically died of shame and pain, and in his place, Sogeking was born as he put on a mask and pretended to be someone else. This is analogous to Jonah sinking into the sea and being swallowed by the whale. Usopp fell into a hole of loneliness and despair, a personal purgatory where he was neither with his friends nor following his dreams. He was on standby with a false identity, licking his wounds. He was neither alive nor dead in terms of his dream of being a pirate. During that time, Usopp reflected and thought about what he really wanted, about what he had done wrong. He gradually realized that his fear and wounded pride had led him to act that way. And just like Jonah prayed and repented in the belly of the whale, Usopp finally accepted in his heart that Luffy was right. The Going Merry had completed its cycle, and it was right to let it go with dignity. So Jonah ended up obeying God and went to the Wicked City to fulfill his mission. He helped Luffy rescue Robin at Enies Lobby. He traveled to the Wicked City of Justice with his god Luffy by his side to save someone many considered an evil person, Nico Robin, who was accused of being a demon by the world government. And after that adventure, Usopp finally let go of the Merry in peace. He cried, apologized to the ship and his companions for his attitude, and also asked to forgive Luffy for having doubted him. Jonas betrayed God, but then repented. Usopp betrayed Luffy, but then asked for forgiveness and rejoined the group. There's even a brilliant final detail. We all know that Usopp's lies tend to come true. It's almost a running joke in One Piece. Usopp, in a way, is a liar whose unintended prophecies end up happening. And who was Jonah in the Bible? A prophet, a somewhat rebellious one, yes, but a prophet nonetheless. In Water 7, Usopp told a big lie by pretending to be Sogeking, and that lie ended up becoming partly true. He became a hero for an entire island. Usopp has always had that aura of the liar who unintentionally tells the truth. Usopp is literally a prophet, just like Jonah was. Do you see where I'm going? For a theory that relies more on interpretations than concrete data, this is quite solid and consistent. Oda often takes mythological or historical inspirations and creatively remixes them. And I think we have identified a very strong pattern here. Usopp's story in Water 7 is an almost exact mirror of Jonah's story. Too many coincidences to ignore. It is very possible that in the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or others, something similar happened with Joy Boy, the Luffy of the past. And then, if Oda already narrated that dynamic in a microcosm with Usopp and Luffy, it is very possible that the story of the Greater Past, the Void Century, or even before, something similar happened with Joy Boy, who would be the Luffy of the past, and also with Davy Jones, who would be the Usopp of the past. Notice Water 7. Usopp was not the captain, he was a crew member. In Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones was originally also a crew member serving the goddess Calypso. He was not always his own boss at the beginning. Jonah obviously was a simple man in the service of God. Everything points to Davy Jones in One Piece probably not being the legendary captain of Joy Boy, but his nakama, his friend, his follower, who lost faith in him at a critical moment. And there are more clues within One Piece that reinforce that idea. Do you remember Loki from Elbaf and the recent story? Loki is that giant prince who, according to Big Mom, was going to marry Lola, but the important thing is his relationship with Rox. Loki is devoted to Rox D. Zebek. Well, during the Elbaf arc, Loki offers Luffy a deal and basically says, if you help me free myself, I will grant you what you desire most. Loki presents himself almost like a tempting devil, promising to fulfill the hero's wish in exchange for freedom. Obviously, Luffy ignores the deal, but what does Loki behaving like this make us think of? A lying demon, the devil offering a pact, and in fact, the character of Loki in Norse mythology is the quintessential trickster god. It turns out that Loki has something in common with Usopp, and that is that both are great liars. Usopp is the god Usopp of creative lying, and Loki is an expert at lying. It could even be argued that Rox D. Zebek was also a liar, or at least someone who hid his true intentions. There is a certain air of dishonesty in his character that we still do not understand. Was he really the monster they portray, or did he have a hidden good side? Did he deceive his crew or his enemies? Blackbeard, whom we could see as the heir to Rox's legacy, is also extremely deceitful. He has betrayed practically everyone, has multiple personalities according to some, and seems like a pattern. The disciples of the legacy of Davy Jones, Rox, Blackbeard, Loki, share the characteristic of using lies as a tool. And Usopp, our Jonah avatar, is the benevolent liar. Let's recap this hypothetically reconstructed story of Davy Jones in One Piece by combining everything discussed. Davy Jones was a crew member of a great character. Let's call him Joy Boy to simplify it. A character parallel to Luffy in the ancient era could be the Joy Boy of the Void Century, or even earlier, if we consider that history is cyclical and that there have been several worlds. But to avoid confusion, let's say that Davy Jones sailed with Joy Boy about 800-900 years ago. Joy Boy, that ancient Luffy, and Davy Jones had a very strong disagreement. Joy Boy asked Davy Jones to do something that Davy considered wrong or intolerable. Maybe Joy Boy decided not to fight against a certain evil enemy at a given moment, for reasons only he understood, and Davy Jones interpreted it as cowardice or betrayal. This could reflect Oven's decision not to fight against Kaido at the beginning. Decisions that others did not understand and were judged poorly. Let's give a hypothetical example. Suppose Joy Boy encountered an incarnation of evil. Let's call it a sea devil, perhaps the predecessor of Emu. And for whatever reason, Joy Boy decided not to fight him directly at that moment. Perhaps Joy Boy saw that he could not win at that instant without catastrophic consequences. Or maybe he trusted in a long-term plan. Davy Jones, seeing his captain yield or not act against that great evil, would become enraged. For Davy Jones, who was possibly brave but fearful of losing his purpose, that would be unforgivable. Davy might have thought, why, if we have the power of the Sun God on our side, don't we destroy that evil once and for all? Why does Joy Boy hold back? Is he afraid? Is he betraying us? Davy Jones decides that if Joy Boy, his captain, is not going to defeat the devil, then he will do it himself. He abandons Joy Boy's crew, literally throws himself overboard from their shared destiny, separates, and sets out on his own to hunt the devil. This would be the echo of Usopp leaving Luffy behind to fight alone for the Merry, or of Jonah fleeing to avoid fulfilling the mission he disagreed with. Now, Davy finds himself alone, but determined. He recruits a massive crew of perhaps 10,000 men. Does the number sound familiar? Usopp always fantasized about having 8,000 followers. In Dressrosa, he ended up leading thousands unintentionally, and out of nowhere became the leader of hundreds of criminals. Davy Jones, in a Usopp buggy godlike manner, could have gathered an army of pirates by promising them immense gold with his lying tongue. He probably told them exaggerated stories, mixing truths and lies, presenting himself as a messiah who would bring true freedom. All of this by defeating the demon that Joy Boy or others did not dare to face. In other words, Davy Jones became a sort of false god to his followers. For his crew, Davy was the great figure to worship. Let's remember that rocks worship Davy Jones, which implies that Davy Jones cultivated something like a cult of personality. Important difference. Joy Boy's crew followed Joy Boy for his camaraderie, for shared ideals, but none worshipped him as a god. Each had their own dreams, just like the Straw Hats with Luffy. In contrast, Davy Jones's crew probably idolized him fanatically, as if he were infallible. This is similar to what happens with Buggy in the current story. His men see him as almost divine due to misunderstandings and coincidences. Davy Jones might have been like that, a great fraud with accidental charisma who surrounded himself with pirates who acclaimed him without knowing that in reality, he was not as strong as the legend said. With this great army, Davy Jones is going to confront the devil in person. And here I imagine an epic scene, Davy Jones challenging the devil of the sea, whether it's Imu or the possessor of Imu's power at that moment, to an all-or-nothing game, possibly wagering his own soul. A Davy backfight on an exaggerated level, but here is the supreme irony. Davy Jones, despite his entourage of 10,000 men, turns out to be a fraud in terms of real power. Compared to the devil, his followers gradually realize that their leader is not that invincible warrior they believed, and when they see that the duel is lost, they betray and abandon him. Imagine thousands of pirates deserting or turning their backs on him at the crucial moment. Just like Rox's crew apparently abandoned him at God Valley, Davy Jones is left completely alone facing the devil and feels an overwhelming terror for the first time. Davy Jones panics. The great taboo for a pirate is to turn his back in the final battle, but Davy can't help it. He tries to flee, break the duel, cheat to save his life, and that desperate act breaks the rules of the sacred game he had started. That's where the curse comes in. Cheating or fleeing in the game against the devil, Davy Jones automatically loses what he wagered, his soul, to Davy Jones's locker, which ironically bears his name. The devil captures his soul, his essence, and Davy Jones receives a curse. That curse is, as we said, being turned into an immortal demon in the service of the devil. The devil basically says to him, "You wanted to be a fearless warrior? Very well, I grant you your wish in my own way." And Davy Jones transforms into a demonic, immortal, powerful being, literally heartless, incapable of love or fear, because he no longer has anything to protect. He lost everything. His crew, his friends, his very soul. Davy Jones wanted to feel no fear. He wanted to be strong. Now, as a demon, he feels no fear because he also feels no love or attachments. Paradoxically, he became what he always wanted to be, a warrior invulnerable to fear, but at the cost of losing everything that made him human. I must say that the image of Davy Jones transforming into a demon fits perfectly with what Robin said, cursed by a demon, and with what we saw in Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy tearing out his heart and becoming a monster. It also reminds me of what happened to Doribroggi in the mythology of Elbaf within One Piece, and it's that they said they turned into demons because they fought eternally, although that was more of a sailor's rumor. Even in Elbaf, where we have seen the Sacred Knights, they could be cursed people turned into immortal demons, and the truth is that it really seems that way. The thing is, being a demon is contagious in a certain way. A demon can create more demons because it corrupts others. Davy Jones, already transformed into the Devil's Champion, could have had the power to turn his most loyal followers into demonic creatures as well, spreading the curse. Maybe that's where the first devilfish or other strange races came from. Now let's return to Joy Boy, the friendly captain that Davy left. Joy Boy eventually finds out what happened. His former Nakama, Davy Jones, has been cursed, turned into a demon, and is wreaking havoc under the Devil's orders. Joy Boy, true to his principles, wants to save his friend even though his friend has betrayed him. Joy Boy has two options. 1. Kill Davy Jones, end the demon, and 2. Try to recover Davy Jones's soul from the Devil's locker. Killing him would be terribly difficult emotionally because Davy Jones was his friend, his nakama. Think about Luffy. Do you think Luffy could kill Usopp even if Usopp turned evil? It would be devastating, so it is assumed that Joy Boy prefers to use option B, rescuing Davy Jones's soul. And how do you recover a lost Nakama? Exactly, by playing again according to the rules. You have to re-enter the game against the Devil and win this time. This is precisely one of the rules of the Davy backfights. The only way to recover a lost comrade is to play and win. So I imagine that Joy Boy, far from giving up, decides that even though he cannot now, at some point he will challenge the Devil in his game again to save Davy Jones. And I think that intention is so significant that it almost becomes a promise that transcends time. Here is a metaphorical element in One Piece. Dreams are equivalent to the soul. Recovering our dreams from the Devil is a recurring theme. For example, in Thriller Bark with the Stolen Shadows, or in Whole Cake with Big Mom stealing Lifetime in exchange for security. Luffy, during Whole Cake Island, decides not to fight Big Mom head on because his priority is to properly get Sanji back, to wait, to trust that his Nakama is ready to return. In the same way, Joy Boy might choose a long-term plan to recover Davy Jones without sacrificing him. Now let's imagine that everything we are talking about happened in the Void Century, 900 years ago. We know that somehow Joy Boy failed in his original mission as he left an apology message on the poneglyphs. I am inclined to think that Joy Boy did not manage to save Davy Jones at that time. He might have tried, but the circumstances did not allow it. In fact, Joy Boy might have had to choose between defeating the Devil, Imu, or saving Davy Jones. And as we speculated before, perhaps defeating the Devil by brute force would not return Davy's soul. On the contrary, it could destroy it forever. Like with Mariah, if you kill the one who has the shadows might not return. Joy Boy, facing that impossible situation, might have thought, if I kill Imu now, I may never recover my friend's soul. But if I leave Imu alive, my friend remains cursed and the world is in danger. What do I do? A very tragic choice, but what do we know about Joy Boy? That he never gave up on his dream, and that in the face of failure, he decided to pass on his will to the future. I think Joy Boy chose an unexpected option. He defeated Davy Jones, incapacitated him without killing him, and hid him. Yes, similar to what Shanks did with Loki, whom we know he defeated but did not kill, instead he imprisoned him. And I imagine Joy Boy facing Davy Jones, an emotional duel like Luffy versus Usopp. Joy Boy defeats Davy Jones in combat, but he doesn't have the heart to kill him. Instead, he locks him away in some secret and safe place where Emu, the Devil, cannot easily find him. Maybe he seals him in some place in the deep sea or inside some structure, perhaps in Laugh Tale itself or in the secret sea beneath the Reverse Mountain. Let's speculate. He might have locked him in an inaccessible place, trusting that in the future someone worthy will find him and be able to free him in the right way. Joy Boy, having to do this and not being able to truly free his friend, feels that he has failed his dream. Remember the phrase, the day Joy Boy could not save someone was the day Joy Boy could no longer fulfill his dream. That's why Joy Boy wrote the letter of apology on the poneglyph of the island, because he couldn't completely free the world, he couldn't save all his friends. Joy Boy then leaves his treasure behind, and what is Joy Boy's most precious treasure? Probably his crew, his friends, and among them, Davy Jones was very special, so it is very possible that part of the One Piece treasure is, in fact, Davy Jones himself, or something related to him. Then we arrive at the present, the third world, the era of Luffy. Luffy, as the heir to Joy Boy's will not only defeat the Devil Emu, but his final mission will also be to save him. How so? Well, you see, now we will delve into an even more philosophical aspect of the theory. One Piece, the story, at its core, is not simply about the good defeating the bad. It has increasingly taken shape as a story about breaking the cycle of hatred and saving the world completely without leaving loose ends of resentment. And it is possible that this means that, in the end, Luffy not only defeats Imu, the devil, but also saves him from his hatred and loneliness. Jonah in the Bible had much in common with Lucifer, yes, the fallen angel. Jonah was a servant of God who rebelled, and Lucifer was an angel of God who rebelled out of pride. In a way, Jonah and, by extension, Davy Jones, represent that rebel who, out of pride and misunderstanding, became an adversary of God. Lucifer, according to tradition, was filled with pride and wanted to be above God, which fits with the ambition of certain characters, perhaps Imu himself, who is literally above the world in Mary Geoise and with a divine complex. The story of One Piece, in my opinion, is about achieving the impossible, and what could be more impossible than creating a world where everyone can achieve their dreams and no one suffers? It sounds utopian and unattainable. Many villains in One Piece, Crocodile, Doflamingo, Kaido, have that cynical view that achieving a just world is impossible. Even characters like Akainu believe that only through strict control can peace be maintained, sacrificing individual dreams. But Oda has been showing us that the way to win is not by playing by the same rules of evil. It is not. The strongest imposes their justice, like Akainu, but it is something different. Luffy represents that difference. Luffy gains friends instead of subjugating them and inspires instead of frightening. So, going back to the metaphor of God against the devil, you can't beat the devil at his own game, because if you do, you become the same as Pirates of the Caribbean taught. Each side that took power became the new tyrant. Luffy cannot become the kind of person who imposes his dream by killing those who oppose him, because then he stops being Luffy. That's why I believe the ultimate goal is not to defeat the Devil Emu by destroying him, but to save him. But what does it mean to save the devil? Well, to redeem the adversary, to convince the enemy that they were wrong and bring them out of their darkness. Think about this. Oda often redeems evil characters or gives them nuances. An example would be the racist fishmen who changed thanks to Otohime. Perhaps Imu cannot be redeemed 100%, but his champion, Davy Jones, might be. And if you manage to save the devil's champion, that is, bring Davy Jones back to humanity, you would be showing the devil himself that his cause was wrong. Ultimately, this story might be about how everyone deserves to be saved, even those who have fallen into darkness. Luffy has never killed his enemies. He breaks their will, makes them see their mistakes through sheer force, but he makes them reconsider to some extent. And to defeat the devil of One Piece, Emu, Luffy will probably need everyone's help. No one can do it alone, not even God. One Piece has always been about friendship, cooperation, and perhaps the great irony is that the way to defeat Imu is not by giving him a punch stronger than the one Joy Boy gave him 800 years ago, but by convincing him of something. What could that something be? Well, it could precisely be showing him that his dream can also be fulfilled in a way. Do it correctly. If Imu is indeed that Usopp from the first world we speculated about, an ancient enemy betrayed who wants to undo the world out of pain, then perhaps Imu also has a deep dream of recovering something lost, and could be the one to make the devil laugh. That is, break Im's wall of hatred, making him see the light. Yes, it sounds cheesy, but it fits with the recurring idea of inherited will, and we will meet again and the dawn will come. In concrete terms, I think Luffy and his allies will end up confronting Imu and his Shadow Army in the end, and in that climax it is very possible that Davy Jones himself will appear. Imu might try to use Davy Jones, if somehow recaptured, as a false deity to deceive the world or to fight. Perhaps Imu has been keeping the legend of Davy Jones alive as a destructive god in which part of the world believes. And all this would be to manipulate the masses. Remember in the buff, the doubt there was about Nika, whether he was a god of laughter, a warrior god, or what. Perhaps Imu has promoted the worship of a vengeful sun god, who is actually Davy Jones, to counter the worship of the liberating sun god, the ancient Joy Boy or Nika, but Imu has the hat, not the man. This suggests that Davy Jones is currently beyond Imu's reach. Where? It could be in Laugh Tale itself. Imagine that the final treasure includes freeing an ancient prisoner, Davy Jones, and learning the truth. I think that Joy Boy might have left Davy Jones safeguarded on the final island, Laugh Tale, which is literally a tale of laughter. Roger laughed upon discovering the story, so maybe they saw that the whole cycle was very ironic. Perhaps they laughed upon understanding that Laugh Tale literally involved making someone who hasn't laughed in centuries laugh, the very demon Davy Jones, or Emu himself. Roger and his crew arrived too early. They couldn't do anything about it. They just laughed, took note, and left. That's why Roger called that place the Story of Laughter, because there's a cosmic plan to provoke the most impossible laughter, that of the devil. I'm speculating a mile a minute, I know, but let me finish the thread. What is Luffy's dream? We know that Luffy has told his Nakamas his hidden dream, and that they all reacted with surprise and smiles. Ace and Sabo heard it as children and laughed. Oda hides that dream from us. My guess is that Luffy's dream is something seemingly silly but immense, like, I want everyone to be free and have fun together in a big worldwide party, something like going around the world with everyone as friends. I don't know, but I've seen popular theories that his dream is to throw the biggest party in history where everyone laughs. I would express it like this: Luffy's dream is to make even the most bitter enemy laugh. Maybe as a child, he saw Ace and Sabo so serious and competitive that he said, I will make everyone laugh with something no one imagines. That dream would be passed from Joy Boy to Roger to Luffy. Joy Boy did not kill the enemy because his childhood dream was, one day I will make this enemy, the devil, truly smile with us. It sounds crazy, yes. It's ridiculous, yes. So ridiculous that it fits with Roger's laughter upon reaching the end. Joy Boy, perhaps, instead of killing Imu, wanted to redeem him, and that's why he couldn't fulfill his normal war mission. Roger laughed because he understood the magnitude of Joy Boy's plan. Did this guy really want to do this? How crazy, or what an innocent child. He called it Laugh Tale because of that story destined for a laugh. Then, in the final battle, Luffy will surely release Davy Jones. It could even happen earlier to turn the tables against Imu. Maybe Blackbeard, in his quest for power, will reach the cell first and release Davy Jones, hoping to use him for his own ends. Blackbeard might be the one to release Davy Jones, believing he will gain a demonic ally or simply to cause chaos. Or perhaps Luffy will release him, understanding that it is the right thing to do, even knowing it is danger. Imagine the situation. Someone says, don't release him, Luffy. That guy will destroy the world if you do. And Luffy replying something like, chaining someone forever. I don't like that at all. If he's really that bad, then I'll see how to defeat him later, but I don't plan to leave anyone locked up just out of fear, because Luffy believes in absolute freedom. He did it with Boa Hancock, whom he didn't hand over, with Law, who broke the Shichibukai system, with the prisoners of Impel Down. He always frees people, even if they can be dangerous, because he trusts in facing the consequences. So Luffy would free Davy Jones just like with Loki, who was also chained, and he would do it without hesitation for the simple principle of, if he really is that troublesome, then I'll deal with him when the time comes. That is Luffy's mentality. Once free, Davy Jones would probably still be under the demonic curse, resentful. He could be a great temporary antagonist, a former hero turned into a destructive demon, maybe Davy Jones, the demon and Blackbeard ally out of convenience, or Imu controls him mentally from a distance, who knows. The final battle could be chaos with multiple fronts. Luffy allies against Imu and his forces, against Blackbeard, and in the middle, Demon Davy Jones wreaking havoc. But the key to winning, as we have said, will not only be hitting harder, but breaking the cycle. How is it broken? By connecting with the enemy on a human level. Joy Boy in the past couldn't kill his treasure. Luffy couldn't kill Usopp if he were possessed either. He would try to save him. Something like that would surely happen. Maybe the current Usopp has to face his own ultimate fear and play a critical role. Many believe that Usopp could temporarily die fulfilling his lie. He said in Thriller Bark, I died, and you know. And in Pirates of the Caribbean, to free Davy Jones in the end, what they do is kill him. Maybe in One Piece, Usopp would have a sacrificial moment, meaning he doesn't really die, but he dies for a while. It could be that to break Davy Jones's curse, someone has to offer their life or something symbolic. It would be very powerful if Usopp were the one to voluntarily sacrifice his life so that Luffy can reach Emu or to save someone else. It would be the culmination of his dream to be the bravest. Imagine Usopp sacrificing himself, proving to Davy Jones, the great original lying demon, that the gods, Luffy in this case, truly value their friends to the death. Or to Imu, that first Usopp shows that true friendship exists. I'm going off on future tangents, so I'm returning to the overall structure. Luffy in the end is going to achieve what Joy Boy could not, recover the soul of Davy Jones. This would surely mean also destroying all the devil fruits, freeing all those trapped souls, and possibly destroying the eternal flame that caused all the imbalance, which would be like the source of energy or magic that corrupted the natural cycle, perhaps an artifact hidden in the planet's core, the famous Forbidden Sun mentioned in ancient texts. That is, what could be the Mother Flame, but from the Void Century. Remember, a theory within the same story speculates that the current world is built on another, and that the Red Line is like the keel that keeps the world afloat, separated from the underworld. If the Red Line is recklessly destroyed, it would be a cataclysm that would unite the seas, which would be good, but it could sink the world, which would be bad. Many good characters want to destroy the Red Line, Shoji, the Giants, and all this is to unite the world and fulfill the prophecy of the All Blue. It's like a narrative mandate that it must be destroyed. But here the theory also proposes, what if the Red Line is also what keeps hell sealed below? If Imu precisely wants to destroy the Red Line, it might not be to unite the world fraternally, but to sink everything into hell. Maybe Imu believes that by returning everything to the Red Sea, they will reunite with their deceased loved ones or something like that. It would be a great twist if Imu, whom we all believe to be a defender of the status quo, actually wants to destroy the current world for something personal. Then Luffy would have to make difficult decisions. Destroy the Red Line to fulfill everyone's dream? Have a unified sea? But if he destroys it, he would unleash the infernal chaos below. He might handle it. But the story of One Piece is about taking those risks for dreams, entering the belly of the whale that is facing that enormous challenge even if it might destroy you. Luffy is not afraid of that leap of faith. He will bring the dawn and tear down the Red Line, I am almost sure, because it is necessary for the era of unification. Maybe that will be the final battle. Luffy against Imu, literally at the center of the world, in the hell of the Red Sea, with the eternal flame burning there. Perhaps Imu wants to use Pluton or something to break the last barrier. The base of the Red Line, let's imagine. And Luffy decides that he will do it his way, and in the end, by destroying that eternal flame, all the devil fruits in the world stop working and release the accumulated souls. This would be a crazy ending where suddenly all the users lose their powers because Luffy freed the souls from before, returning humanity to its natural state. It could be that Davy Jones, the demon, regains his humanity at that moment when his soul returns. Imagine that scene. Luffy manages to destroy the source. Demon Davy Jones staggers, a light comes out of his chest, and finally his soul or heart returns. He becomes himself again after centuries. And there, maybe Luffy or someone else must sacrifice themselves to stop Imu. But by then, Davy Jones would be free from the curse. Ultimately, Luffy would have fulfilled Joy Boy's dream, saving both his friends, Sanji, Robin, and so on, as he did during his journey, and even the lost friend from the past, Davy Jones, and even the original enemy in a certain sense. The "all the broken pieces will become one" could refer to all wills and souls finally resting together. Those from the first world, second world, and third would reunite. There might even be reunions of spirits. The shadow of Joy Boy greeting the soul of his old friend David. It would be an emotional ending. I know all this sounds huge, maybe it's too convoluted, but hey, it's One Piece. It's huge and convoluted if you think about it. And to me at least, this story seems worthy of One Piece, with all its epic scale, its laughter, its philosophical twists, and its heart. I have unleashed a barrage of theories one after another, and I understand if some parts seem too much to digest. Oda will obviously have to package all this simply for the general audience when the end comes. But I think the central message would be something like, it's not just about defeating evil, but about breaking the cycle of hatred, saving even those who seemed irredeemable, fulfilling everyone's dreams, not just a few. This would be the One Piece in a conceptual sense, the total unity of everyone laughing under the same free sky. To summarize a bit, I conceive the One Piece literally as everything. That is, the collection of all good things, the dreams of each character, complete freedom, shared joy, the unified history. All of that is the One Piece. But within the story, what matters is what the One Piece means to Luffy, because that is the interpretation that will count in the end. If for Luffy, One Piece is traveling around the world in an eternal banquet with all his friends and rivals, then that is what it will be. And that absurd dream is inherited. Many have had it. Roger, Joy Boy. I firmly believe that Luffy's dream is to make every being in the world laugh, even his enemies, whether at a party or an unprecedented event. A dream so childlike and innocent that Ace and Sabo laughed upon hearing it, that the Straw Hats reacted with surprise but understood it, and that Roger himself surely shared, because otherwise he wouldn't have laughed upon reaching Laugh Tale. Maybe he gave a message from Joy Boy like, I hope you can make everyone laugh someday, even that grumpy king of the world. Roger called the last point Laugh Tale because he understood that everything revolved around a final laugh, the hardest laugh to achieve. And going back to Davy Jones, just to wrap up, I think it is very likely that Davy Jones, the historical character from One Piece, will appear in some way in the final plot. He will surely be released by Blackbeard, Luffy, or one of these two, and will play a very important role, either as a tremendous danger or as an unexpected ally. But definitely, I bet that Davy Jones will be freed from his curse in the end. Maybe Luffy will free him, or perhaps it will be Blackbeard trying to use him and Luffy will free him from control. Luffy believes in freedom, so seeing someone chained against their own will, whether it's Davy Jones or even Loki, whom he just freed, he won't like it at all. Even if they say to him, don't do it because it will destroy the world, Luffy would think, if it really is that bad, when he is free and wants to do evil, I will stop him myself, but I will not leave him chained out of fear. That is the essence of Luffy, and I bet Oda will make that decision of faith by Luffy the right one, because in the end, Luffy will find a way to stop any threat without sacrificing his principles. Possibly Luffy will need the help of many to achieve all this. Maybe Brook's music and the crew wanted to make the rest laugh. Perhaps Shanks and others will participate in the final battle against Blackbeard. We have mentioned many elements. Maybe Laugh-Tale is inside a colossal sleeping whale. Imagine, there are theories that the final island could be a living being. Blackbeard might become obsessed with hunting that whale, while Luffy, on the other hand, would conquer it with laughter and music, with Binks' sake to open the route perhaps? Everything fits thematically. Although there are several things I've said that may not happen exactly as stated, I honestly believe that if Oda were to tell us something along these lines, it would be a story worthy of One Piece, full of adventure, mythology, excitement, strength, humor, and wit. Whether you agree with parts, none, or all of what I've shared here, I hope you at least found the theory interesting. One Piece has accustomed us to speculate on a grand scale, and I think this crazy theory fits well with that. For my part, I have had a lot of fun connecting these points and delving into the more philosophical angle of Davy Jones's fate and the essence of One Piece. In conclusion, my summarized version would be that Davy Jones was in Joy Boy's bed, fell into disgrace, and Joy Boy left his rescue pending. Luffy and his friends will be the ones to finally rescue him and everyone, even the world itself and the devil, thus completing the dream inherited for centuries. Does it sound crazy? Of course it does. But if any story can take us on such a wild path and then make it feel logical and emotional, that story is One Piece. In any case, this is the theory. Whether you agree with everything or maybe just some things that might seem too much, I hope you found it entertaining and that it made you think about new possibilities. One Piece is an amazing adventure, and I think if it ends like this, it would be a fitting conclusion to the legend. And so, here we have this incredible theory that seems crazy to me.